Hey guys, today I'm going to make a video going over sensors that y'all have been asking about. People have been posting about, what should I add to my combo in a kind of a priority. So I put together a spreadsheet a while ago for our customers when they ask us this, and I figured I would share it with y'all and then show you some of the data from their intended purposes. So this is a log of a this this is actually for my own personal car. This was a pretty soft tune up in here, but it's a good indicator of how data can help you and what data you may find more useful than others. So before we get into reviewing the data, I kind of want to show you my spreadsheet here. So this is a suggestion for sensors for a turbo application. So all of this stuff here is you've already got, engine oil pressure and coolant temperature and fuel pressure and whatnot, and air temp from the factory from Holley. These are in addition to. So you HP guys, this is where you're living, right? So this is what I suggest for the HP and the Terminator X guys, your entry level stuff here. So boost control on a turbo application is number one. That's the most important part of this whole deal. Without good boost control, you're pissing in the wind here. So you got a boost controller, which there's the part number that I recommend. These are Holley part numbers. Everything you see here, I sell as a dealer, but you're welcome to pick up from your dealer or whatnot. Some of this stuff you're going to have a hard time finding. So, but dig around unless you just contact me and I'll sell it to you. I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to sell you anything here. This is just what I use for my own customers when we wire cars to kind of educate the customer about what we feel is the most important facets when it comes to drag racing. All of this is based around drag racing. So if you autocross, if you drift race, take what you want out of this. Some stuff will be important, some stuff won't. So your entry level, dome pressure, it's 100 psi pressure transducer. Boost control solenoids, those two go hand in hand, so dome pressure and boost control. I don't support map-based, piggybacked, splice into some wire, do some crap boost control. I don't support it. I don't use it. We use CO2 or compressed air from like an air compressor that's on board. That's how we use boost control. It works. It's repeatable. It's accurate, and it's pretty simple. So, and I've made videos on how to set all that kind of stuff up, which you probably have already watched. Then you've got trans brake and bump. So, one way to free up some IO with a HP or Terminator is picking up a bump box from Davis. They work very, very well, and it'll free up a few IOs for you. So that if you had some other stuff like, you wanted a fan or something, whatever, you can free up a little bit of IO there. But if not, there's the relay that you use for it, and I've made videos on how to do that. And the most important part for a entry level combo, if you're just starting out or if you're in an HP or a Termex and you're drag racing this thing, is drive shaft speed. Drive shaft speed is the number one most important facet, in my opinion, for drag racing. And I only recommend, install the Davis 32 tooth ring with a Davis sensor. They work excellent every single time. No smoothing, no BS. They just flat out work. They're rugged. That's built, right in North Carolina. They're not Chinese. They're not junk. They last forever. I've yet to have an issue with any of them that hasn't been, they touched down because a rear end broke or something like that. So that's and again, contact your Davis dealer or myself or whatever. We get you set up with it. So that's your entry level. Your next level here is I just wrote this for stage 2 just so it's easy for my girlfriend to understand, because she does all of our part sales. G meter. I'm going to show you how to tune it. I'm going to show you a little bit of data with a G meter. I'm not going to show you how to tune with a G meter, but a G meter from Holley. There's a part number. If you're on a budget, this is a fantastic G meter, works fantastic. It's actually the same as the raceback G meter that's been around forever, that works really well. Coolant pressure, if applicable. So if if you've got coolant in the engine, it's worthwhile to be monitoring the pressure. It'll kind of tell you when you're dancing around that edge of when you're about to hurt the engine or not. Converter charge pressure. This one, I'd love to be able to move to entry level, but it just, you can find a lot of problems with a car with converter charge pressure. A lot of people think that they just buy a torque converter from a company and it's perfect, and this is the converter that I'm supposed to have, and I don't understand why the car doesn't go 390s and whatever. Well, a lot of it has to do with converter charge pressure, and if you don't know the data going down the racetrack, you're pissing in the wind again. And then this isn't necessarily a sensor, but this is something that I recommend to everybody. Put an air shifter in the car. I know you think that you can shift these things perfect every time. I'm within 3 RPM, yada, yada. You'll never have a consistent race car or modified street car without some form of shift control. Without some form of automated shift control, you'll never be extremely consistent with a turbo car. And all this is a 3-port solenoid or 3-port Mac valve from Holley, and that's the part number. So converter charge pressure, there's the part number. Coolant pressure, 100 psi sensor, just like up here for dome. And then you got your G meter. So, and if you're limited on IO and you decide that you really want to put a G meter in, because maybe you bought a bump box from Davis and you freed up, your bump input or whatever, so now you're going to put a G meter in. If you only want to use one axis on the G meter, use the X axis. That's front to back. Y axis is side to side. All right, next, stage 3, exhaust back pressure. You can see this number, looks familiar. It's a 100 psi pressure transducer. I'll show you back pressure data here in a second. And then this right here is a Davis VPS. If you have a Dominator, you just need to buy one of these, period. It replaces the Holley G meter. So if you're building a new combo or you're planning upgrades or whatnot, you just buy a Davis VPS, and you'll see why in a minute. You need one, use it. I promise you will not regret having a VPS in the car. So, and then the next is going to be 2 shock travel sensors. So one for the front, one for the rear. I prefer 4. It's not so much that I prefer 4. You don't need 4. I'm a data junkie. I tune cars that have been very, very fast with 2. Hell, I tune cars that have been very fast with 1. But it is worthwhile investment to add 2 shock travel sensors. The shock travel sensors that I use, that I recommend, that I sell, that I stand behind are from G-Spot Sensors. Tom Fiddler makes a great product. And I've never had an issue with them. There's other brands out there. I'm not going to get into a piss and match about who's the best and who's the worst, but this is what I like. This is what I use. Works really well. PanVac. So PanVac is going to show you how much vacuum is in the engine. And this part number is, well, here, we'll just get on here. There's a 554133. 133. This is a stainless 1-bar map sensor. So it looks just like a pressure transducer, but it's a 1-bar map sensor. So what that will do is it will show you inches of vacuum. So when the car's sitting there idling, you should be in vacuum. And then it'll show you pressure. And we're monitoring the crankcase. So typically the valley pan or the valley tray underneath the intake manifold, if you start to really lean on an engine, you will find that it'll start to push past the rings, and it'll start to pressurize. It'll start pushing past not just the rings, it'll start pushing past a whole bunch of stuff, and it'll start to pressurize the crankcase. That's an indicator of you don't have enough vent on the engine, as in, catch tank and fitting on the valve covers. It's not big enough, the hose ain't big enough, whatever. Or it'll eventually turn into a sign of man, I need to re-ring this thing and have this engine gone through because I've pushed it to its limits. You start seeing a bunch of pressure on the pan back, you'll know it because it's probably going to push a bunch of oil into your catch tanks, but it's also detrimental. You know, when you start putting oil into the combustion chamber, that's no good. You don't want to do that. So, stage 4, front wheel speed is something some guys really like this. The only reason I really care for front wheel speed is to let me know exactly when the tire comes off the ground. Other than that, I don't really use it. Anyway, I helped develop some new shit that isn't out yet from Strange, and it'll be out shortly, but it's pretty badass, and that's what I recommend. There's some other people out there that do it, but the Strange one's pretty slick. Next is exhaust gas temperature. So this I put a little note here. Stage 2 if on M1, right? So if this is an alcohol combo, I highly suggest putting exhaust gas temperature in it. The part number from Holley is here. There are other fantastic kits out there. The other one is from Mad Racing Products, Glenn Payne. He makes a really slick exhaust gas temperature setup that integrates with Holley. He also, if you decide you want to use the CAN bus, because the only way to do CAN bus is with this part number. If you want to do CAN bus, he also makes a really, really nice billet aluminum bulkhead that will pass your exhaust gas temperature probes through the firewall, and it's plug and play with the Holley EGTs. So, if you insist on using the CAN bus, use this part number. If not, hit up Glenn at Mad Racing Products. He makes a really, really nice EGT setup. Next is trans mainline PSI. So this is actually the pressure across the transmission, not in the converter circuit. You'll see why that's important. That's kind of a preemptive telling you if you're starting to have a transmission problem. And then last is trans temp. In stage 4, it's not super important for transmission temp because if you have a race car, you're typically cooling the thing down in the pits in between every round. But it is a nice little addition and it's cheap enough. So stage 5, 2 more shock travel sensors. Again, G-spot sensors. Oil temp. So this is just your standard GM fluid temperature sensor. Part number from Holley. I moved this to stage 2 on M1. And the reason being is if you've got water in the engine, but typically you want to run the car based off of oil temp as opposed to water temp with an alcohol combo. But if you don't have water in the engine, you can just use your coolant temp sensor circuit and drill weld a bung in the oil pan and then monitor your oil temp. And then you have all of your coolant enrichment tables based off of oil temp. That's how I do it with cars that don't have any water in the system. And then you got CO2 bottle PSI. This one's important because sometimes people are stupid and they let go of the button and they got no CO2 in the bottle. So this one's semi-important. So this one will be an indicator of when every time you're checking data, you can go, oh, look, we're almost out of CO2. Maybe we need to fill that up before we make another pass. Or grab a new bottle from somebody else or in the trailer. And then lastly, turbo shaft speed. This is a pretty good indicator as to when the turbo is going to be out of steam. This is a race pack part number. Pretty sure this is an industry standard. It's an M6 thread, fine thread, but I'm pretty sure this is industry standard for turbo shaft speed. And then we've got stage I hate money. So I kept this one kind of short. There's a whole group of stuff that we could put in here. But most of the time, if you're into this area here, you're typically calling somebody like myself or others. There's tons of other great guys out there that do this for a living. You're typically talking to your tuner, you're talking to your builder, your car builder, whatever it may be. But if you're into this stage, you're typically talking to somebody that is there to expedite the process of going very fast. So we've got track temp, tire temp, ambient inlet temp. So temp sensor just hanging out in front of the turbo. fuel temp. I use an MSEL fluid temp for both that, and then the converter circuit temp. This one's kind of scary when you look at it, because if you have a turbo car and you're on the trans brake, you'll be kind of concerned about how high this gets. And then a high-speed inlet air temp, again, stage 3 if this is a hot air combo like on methanol. And then I use a sensor from Hyperactive. The Greg Hurlbut at Hyperactive is awesome to deal with. Joe Opaleski. They have a fantastic air temp sensor. So let's look at some data here. So right here we got a basic, this is all we got RPM trace, right? So, you can add your standard stuff here. So here's TPS. This pass, I think this pass went a 451. No, I'm sorry, 441, 167. So just for reference, right? So this is a small block single turbo car. This is my own personal white convertible. This is from actually like a year ago. And but it was like one of the only data logs I've had on this new computer that didn't look terrible from, power wheelies and whatnot. So you'll notice that my car works a little bit different than what you'll see from a lot of people, but it flashes up pretty high. It gets up to 6,900, 7,000 RPM, kind of hangs out for a little while. And you're going to see why in a minute. So let's look at converter charge pressure. So we're on the trans brake and we got 72 PSI. When we let go of the trans brake, it closes one of the dump valves, spikes up to 114 PSI, starts bleeding it off. If you notice, RPM flashes, rolls back down a little bit, okay, and then comes back up and then rolls here where we see converter charge pressure drop all the way down. This is where the second dump valve gets shut. Pressure starts to climb, and then right before the shift, the converter is getting to the point where it is very efficient and it's moving all the fluid out of it like it should. We're down to 34 PSI, and we hit the shift and it does the same thing. Starts to decline on its way back down as it starts getting up in RPM. So this pass here, my personal car likes to get shifted about 8,300. This was just a soft, easy, let's make sure this thing goes down the racetrack and doesn't do anything stupid. And, I only turned it to 7,800 instead of 8,300. So without converter charge data, we may look at this and say, well, what is all this going on here? Why do we have RPM dropping here and here? Now, granted, if you didn't have converter charge data and you had this going on, you also wouldn't have dump valves, and your RPM trace would look kind of like this. So, converter charge pressure is a great thing to have. Here's VPS. So this is X-axis. So this could also be substituted for the Holley G meter and X-axis, but this is just one of the sensors that are built into the VPS. So let's look at the VPS, right? So we've got it scaled to minus 5 Gs and plus 5 Gs. So when we're on the trans brake, it's at 0 Gs, right? Now, as we let go of the trans brake, we get that quick hump, right? And where does it roll over at? Well, it rolls over here on the G meter, rolls over right here around 2.23, 2.25 G, and it rides it, and it slowly starts to drop. So the idea here with the G meter, and you notice, starts to kind of bounce up and down a little bit here because we got a little bit of funky stuff going on with the transmission intentionally. So it drops, and then when it makes the shift, you get a small spike out of it. Now, if I use this data for the next pass to say, hey, the track took 2.24 G really easy. I feel like it'll take more power in the front half of the racetrack, and I feel like I could bring the power in a good bit faster. And that's exactly what I use this data for, because it held this G number, it held this G reading all the way out here. We could pour the power in here, through this run. So I'm sorry, I apologize. I just looked at my notes. This pass was a 451. So this was a 451 at 167 miles an hour. So this went 451 at 167 miles an hour. I used this G meter data. The next pass out with the car, we went 443 at 166 miles an hour. But the whole front half of the track picked up because we used the G data from the VPS. So other cool thing out of the VPS is pitch. So let's scale the pitch. Let's go minus 10 degrees to plus 10 degrees. So what did the car do from lifting the wheels, right? So it sat here nice and level. Let go of the button. And here's where the car actually reacts and snatches the front end up. So snatches the front end up a little bit, 0.6, 0.7 degrees. But my car, the back end of the car actually drives over top of the front end of the car. And you'll notice that the VPS pitch data is going negative because the back end of my car extends a whole heck of a lot more than the front end of my car does. So there's good VPS data showing you that here's the back end of the car all the way out here, still overdriving past the front end of the car. Here's where the rear shock finally stops, and here's where the front end starts to come back up. So, and this was actually part of the problem with my own personal car, is it would like to power wheelie, around the shift or right after. So we learned from that with pitch data. So next, we've got transline PSI. Again, like I said earlier, this is kind of one of those things that just tells you, is there something going wrong? So, this is one of those things that you take this data, we're 227 PSI on the trans brake. If you start to see huge swings with this data, which this isn't a huge swing, 203 PSI, it's not a big deal. But you can see it couples together just like the converter does. Right around the shift, you get a drop, right? Because it's actually engaged in the shift, and then it comes right back up. Everything looks nice and smooth. Your transmission builder will thank you for this data, okay? Next, we've got EGTs, right? So exhaust gas temperature. I only put one up here, but disregard what you read here. I'm not going to get into that with tuning, but I run EGT a little hotter than other people do, and part of that is because of the actual connection that is made at the firewall. So it is not a cold it's an actual cold junction. So I don't want to get into that, but I didn't use your standard pass-throughs through the firewall. So there's a little bit of an offset here for temperature. So it reads a little bit hotter than it should, but this is all accurate within itself, right? So EGT data is great to see if you've got a cylinder that drops out, if you've got a one cylinder that's extremely hot while the rest of them are cold. I don't know if I've got a whole page dedicated. I don't think I do. Sorry, a little tangent there. But you can see that it's trending hotter and hotter. And by looking at this, we could probably say, hey, you know what? In high gear, we may need a little bit more fuel. So we could probably add a little bit of fuel, up in this area. EGT's great data, especially on an alcohol combo. Now, here's shock travel sensors, okay? So we're gonna look at the rear and one front, all right? So as you can see, the rear shock is here, right? So when we're on the trans brake, it's reading 1.02 inches, right? So it's sitting there nice and flat and solid. And we let go of the button, and it goes from 1.02, and it's steady climbing. Now, if you notice, probably shouldn't get into this, but the rear shock takes longer to extend than the front shock and goes a good bit further. So remember, we started the rear shock at 1.02, and we peak all the way out here to the 6.2 area. So that is telling us that we have got roughly 5.2 inches of rear extension in the rear shock. This is a good indicator of the shock travel is a good indicator to be able to tell you that, hey, we started at 1.02 or 1.04 and we make it out to here and then the tire spins. Well, maybe we ran out of extension on the rear shock. Maybe the rear shock's just too loose. Maybe it's too tight. There's a lot of good tuning tools in shock travel sensors. And then you've got your front shock showing you the same thing. So we start at 2.3 and we make our way up pretty abruptly to 3.4. So we had 1.2 inches of travel there. So there's shock travel sensors, data, shock velocity. I don't want to get into that. That's different. I'm not doing that. And then turbo shaft speed. So this is a good one. Let's pull up boost. All right. So if you notice, boost looks a little goofy with this pass, and it's because of what we were doing with manipulating the dump valves going down the racetrack. But you can see here where we start the peak boost, notice we're not at peak shaft speed. So what's happening here with shaft speed is it's actually starting to trend downward. Now there's a good bit of smoothing on shaft speed on this, what I'm showing you here. And the reason being is because it's picking up 76,000 RPM. So it's can be semi-erratic. I thought I had the sensor gap correct, but to be honest, I think that I could have afforded to tighten it up a little bit to clean this data up. So when the car goes back out, that'll be taken care of. So hopefully this video kind of explained a lot of what we recommend for sensors and in the procession that we recommend them in. So if you got any questions, feel free to hit up our email at didyouwatchmyvideo at hcrinnovations.com. Leave some commentary on this video or commentary on the Facebook post or whatever, and see if we can't get y'all advancing a little bit more next year. Thanks.